ourselves to have not been perfect, but they can be fixed. And that is why the challenge I wish to issue today is this. Together, we must rebuild and recommit to multilateralism. We must redouble our efforts to work as a global community. We must rediscover our shared belief in the value rather than the harm of connectedness. We must demonstrate that collective international action not only works, but it is in the best interests of all of us. We must show the next generation that we are listening and that we have heard them. But if we're truly going to take on a reform agenda, we need to acknowledge the failings that have led us to this crossroad. International trade, for instance, has helped bring millions of people out of poverty around the world. But some have felt their standard of living slide. In New Zealand, we ourselves have seen the hesitancy around trade agreements amongst our own population. The correct response is not to repeat the mistakes of the past and be seduced by the false promises of protectionism. Rather, we must all work to ensure that the benefits of trade are distributed fairly across our societies. We can't rely on international institutions to do this, in the same way as we cannot blame them if they haven't delivered these benefits. It is incumbent on us to build productive, sustainable, inclusive economies and demonstrate to our peoples that when done right, international economic integration can make all of us better off. And if we want to ensure anyone is better off, surely we should start with the most vulnerable. In New Zealand, we have set ourselves an ambitious goal. We want to be the best place in the world to be a child. It's hardly the stuff of hard and fast measures. After all, how do you measure play, a feeling of security and happiness? But we can measure material deprivation, and we can measure poverty, and so we will. And not only that, we are making it law that we report on those numbers every single year alongside our budgets. What better way to hold ourselves to account, and what better group to do that for than children? But if we are focused on nurturing that next generation, we equally have to worry about what it is that we are handing down to them, including our environment. In the Māori language, there is a word that captures the importance of that role. Kaitiakitanga. It means guardianship. The idea that we have been entrusted with our environment and that we have a duty of care. For us, that has meant taking action to address degradation, like setting standards to make our rivers swimmable, reducing waste and phasing out single-use plastic bags, right through to eradicating predators and protecting our biodiversity. The race to grow our economies and increase wealth makes us all the poorer if it comes at the cost of our environment. In New Zealand, we are determined to prove that it doesn't have to be this way. But these are all actions and initiatives that we can take domestically that ease the blame and pressure on our international institutions. That doesn't mean that they don't need fixing. At the heart of the multilateral system, the United Nations must lead the way. We strongly support the Secretary-General's reform efforts to make the UN more responsive and effective, modernised, so that it is capable of dealing with today's challenges. We encourage him to be ambitious, and we stand with him in that ambition. But ultimately, it is up to us, the member states, to drive change here at the UN. This includes reforming the Security Council. If we want the Council to fulfill its purpose of maintaining international peace and security, its practices need to be updated so it is not hamstrung by the use of the veto. New thinking will also be needed if we're to achieve the vision encapsulated in the Sustainable Development Goals. In New Zealand, we have sought to embed the principles behind the SDGs in a new living standards framework that's guiding policy making and the management of our resources. And we remain absolutely committed to supporting the rollout of the SDGs alongside international partners through a significant increase in our official development assistance budget. But revitalising our international rules-based system isn't just about the mechanics of how we work together. It also means renewing our commitment to our values. The UN Charter recalls that the organisation was formed to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which through 2 world wars had brought untold sorrow to humanity. If we forget this history and the principles which drove the creation of the UN, we will be doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. In an increasingly uncertain world, it is more important than ever that we remember the core values on which the UN was built. That all people are equal. That everyone is entitled to have their dignity and human rights respected. That we must strive to promote social progress and better standards of life and larger freedom. And we must consistently hold ourselves to account on each. Amongst renewing this commitment, though, we have to acknowledge where accountability must continue. And that is especially the case when it comes to equality. So many gains have been made, each worthy of celebration. In New Zealand, we have just marked the 125th year since women were granted the right to vote. We were the first in the world to do so. As a girl, I never ever grew up believing that my gender would stand in the way of me achieving whatever I wanted in life. I am, after all, not the first, but the third female Prime Minister of New Zealand. But for all of that, we still have a gender pay gap, an over-representation of women in low-paid work, and domestic violence. And we are not alone. It seems surprising that in this modern age we have to recommit ourselves to gender equality, but we do. And I, for one, will never celebrate the gains we have made for women domestically, while internationally other women and girls experience a lack of the most basic opportunities and dignity. Me Too must become We Too. We are all in this together.
You're always in the food making, you're always in the kitchen making food, you're always making mess. Look underneath the stove already, underneath the dishwasher already.
Now, I accept that the list of demands on all of us is long, be it domestic or international. We are operating in challenging times. We face what we would call in New Zealand wicked problems, ones that are intertwined and interrelated. Perhaps then it is time to step back from the chaos and ask what we want. It is in that space that we'll find simplicity. The simplicity of peace, of prosperity, of fairness. If I could distill it down into one concept that we are pursuing in New Zealand, it is simple, and it is this.
When we made so much
Kindness.
rice, so much stew, so much
In the
beans,
face of
everything.
isolationism, protectionism, racism, the simple concept of looking outwardly and beyond ourselves, of kindness and collectivism, might just be as good a starting point as any. So let's start here, with the institutions that have served us well in times of need and will do so again. In the meantime, I can assure all of you, New Zealand remains committed to continue to do our part to building and sustaining international peace and security, to promoting and defending an open, inclusive and rules-based international order based on universal values, to being pragmatic, empathetic, strong and kind. The next generation, after all, deserves no less. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of New Zealand for the statement just made in a request protocol to escort Her Excellency.
Say it.